Vanakkam. Hello friends. We have been seeing how epigraphical records have helped usher in early history in these parts and how the Prakrit Brahmi inscriptions of Emperor Ashoka dated to around 3rd century BCE defined the start of early history in Tamizhagam. Recent archaeological discoveries and datings have helped us re-evaluate this very timeline and also the very origin of the Brahmi script. Even before the advent of Tamil Brahmi, there was a peculiar form of writing found in these parts of the country, a pictorial graphical form that is called as graffiti, Kiralhal in Tamil, found abundantly on rock surfaces and on pottery, while some of the early scholars simply disposed them off as some sort of graffiti itself. Now scholars like Dr.Rajan, who have done extensive studies and have tried to form a code of these symbols, are very clear that appearing either as a standalone or in compounded forms, they definitely represented a writing system, and some of the pictorial representations sometimes followed a Tamil Brahmi script, and the most commonly used symbols found are that of the sun, the swastika, the star, the ladder, the fish, the bow and arrow, the wheel, the cart and Nandi Pada. The disappearance of the undeciphered Indus script left many scholars to wonder whether it didn't disappear altogether but reappeared in another form. And there were a few scholars who were of the opinion that this took the form of the graffiti that was evident from the Iron Age megalithic sites. One of the proponents was Mr. B.B. Lal, the former director of ASI, who in his publication in the Bulletin of the ASI, From Megalithic to Harappa, tracing back the graffiti on pottery, concluded that there was a common culture between the Indus Valley civilization and later megalithic period, and probably this cultural continuity could be traced in the graffiti marks as well. He opined that 89% of the surveyed megalithic graffiti symbols had their counterparts in the Indus script. In a place called Sulur near Coimbatore, a very ancient archaeological site that yielded precious stones and beads and iron implements, rouleted ware, punchmark coins and Roman coins dated to the megalithic to early history period, an inscribed terracotta dish that has been dated to the 1st century BCE, very much in intact condition and today lying with the British Museum, had a very interesting inscription of 5 graffiti characters on its concave side. Airavada Mahadevan closely studied the symbol of an X followed by 4 smaller symbols and compared them to some of the pictorial writings of the Indus script. And what captured his attention was that the 5 characters appeared in the same order on a 3-sided prism-like miniature steatite stone tablet found from Harappa that is today housed with the ASI in New Delhi. The common sequence of the symbols made Airavada Mahadevan comment that the 2 scripts could be related in some way. While this view was not accepted by many scholars who came later, recent findings, especially hundreds of graffiti found on potsherds in sites like Kiradi, again are found to closely resemble the Indus script. So, could the South Indian megalithic graffiti be related to the Indus script? Divided opinions still prevail among scholars. While those like Airavada Mahadevan try to link them to the Indus script, archaeologists like Professor Ravi Korisetter try to point out that they were not representative of a language at all, but were simply socio-religious symbols. Well, Professor Rajan saw in them the foundation for a genesis of the Tamil Brahmi script, and the very prevalence of these graffiti marks spread over 1,000 years, right from northwestern India to the southern peninsula further into Sri Lanka, found at various sites dated to between 1000 BCE and 300 Common Era, very much vouched for the fact that they represented a language. Numerous graffiti and inscriptions were excavated from Kodumanal and Porundal by Dr. Rajan et al. At Porundal in the Palani Hills, where Dr. Rajan was the director of the archaeological excavations, a very interesting discovery in a burial site was that of a 4-legged jar that contained within itself about 2 kilos of paddy found in very intact condition. And within the same site, there was a ring stand that had Tamil Brahmi inscriptions on it. Remember, we saw how dating of the Tamil Brahmi was controversial as it was mostly found on rock surfaces and clay, which were non-organic materials and hence could not be subject to carbon dating. Now, here was a chance wherein the archaeologists took specimens from the paddy grains and sent them to the Beta Analytic Lab in the United States. Carbon dating of the paddy showed that it was from 490 BCE, and by means of the fact that they were in the same burial pit as the ring stand, Dr. Rajan and his team concluded that the Tamil Brahmi found in that particular burial site should also be dated to 490 BCE. From yet another site within the same Porundal, a carbon dating of 450 BCE was found. And for the first time, we had concrete proof in Tamil country that writing existed much prior to that of the Ashokan inscriptions dated to 3rd century BCE, whereby we could look at an earlier dating for the beginning of early history. Again, between the years 2012 and 2013, Dr. Rajan and his team conducted several excavations at Kodumanal where potsherds which had a combination of both graffiti and Tamil Brahmi were discovered. And Dr. Rajan points out very clearly how in the stratigraphy, at the bottommost level, the potsherds either were plain or had graffiti symbols, and in the middle level, they had a combination of both graffiti and Tamil Brahmi. But at the uppermost levels, the inscriptions were purely Tamil Brahmi, and from around 300 Common Era, they completely disappear from the graves. Thus, a very clear timeline was established. With over 1200 inscribed pottery shards recovered from different levels in the stratigraphy, some samples were again sent to US to be dated through accelerator mass spectrometry, and some of the samples that were taken from a depth of 120 centimeters yielded a dating of 480 BCE, perfectly tallying with the datings that were obtained from the Porundal samples. And more significant is the fact that at that depth, the samples yielded only Tamil Brahmi letters, while in the upper strata, the Brahmi letters found were a combination of both Tamil and Prakrit. The Department of State Archaeology recently sent some samples that were retrieved from the Kiradi excavations to the same laboratory, which have also come back with a dating to the 6th century BCE. So now with all the scientific proof clearly attesting to the early Tamil writing system that was prevalent in these parts, still many scholars find it very hard to accept this date and are debating this issue. Why? These scientific datings indicate that the Tamil Brahmi was an indigenous invention of the Tamil people and that the script should have gone from here to north. The inference based on paleographic studies showed that the early Tamil Brahmi was in a very simple and rudimentary form and over a period of time attained a standardized form. Merchants from other parts of the subcontinent as well as monks of the Buddhism and Jainism faith who came down south should have borrowed the Tamil Brahmi and modified it to suit the Prakrit language. How do we know this? Certain markers such as the absence of the Varga letters in Tamil to denote sa, ha, dha, bha. While we know that the Tamil script even today has no separate letters to denote the Varga sounds, the commercial and trade centers at Kodumanal, Arikamedu and Alagankulam yielded 6 signs of northern Brahmi letters to denote Varga sounds like bha, dha, sa and ha on the potteries. Now, they were all found on the upper level of the trenches, whereas in Kodumanal, at the trench at 120 centimeters that yielded a dating of 480 BCE, the Brahmi characters denoting Varga sounds were also found. According to Dr. Rajan, this gives a clue that the Prakrit script was probably evolved right here in the Tamil country and adopted by traders from North India and Sri Lanka. They learned the Tamil scripts from the Tamil people, introduced a few letters and took it back. In the year 2017 at Kodumanal, an excavator found a clay tablet which was a sort of a slate in which Tamil Brahmi letters were written in a single line from A to I. Of course, part of the slate was broken and this led him to conclude that probably these non-Tamil traders learned the script and practiced it by writing on clay slates. Another important indicator is that of conjuncts known as Kooteluthu in Tamil, which appear in the Prakrit Brahmi of Ashokan times but was totally absent from the earlier strata of Tamil Brahmi. And very interestingly, that this Brahmi should have gone by sea route to Sri Lanka earlier on is attested by the fact that many caverns carry Tamil Brahmi inscriptions in Sri Lanka without the conjuncts, noting that they belong to an earlier period. While the fact that the Brahmi could be a Tamil invention is still not acceptable to many, Dr. Dilip C. Chakrabarty, Emeritus Professor of South Asian Archaeology in the University of Cambridge, UK, while reviewing Dr. Rajan's book, Early Writing System, A Journey from Graffiti to Brahmi, mentions how even in the late 1990s, when Dr. Rajan was in Cambridge as an academic staff fellow, he had convinced him simply based on early stratigraphy, even before the carbon datings were available, that Kodumanal had yielded Tamil Brahmi, which could be dated to 500 BCE. He shows how it clearly tallies with the 500 BCE radiocarbon dating yielded by similar Tamil Brahmi inscriptions that were discovered from Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. The inscribed pottery of Anuradhapura having been discovered in the 1990s itself, he says, and I quote, "What the Anuradhapura discovery ought to have given birth to was the belief that similar inscriptions from the south should go back to the mid-5th century BCE. This regrettably did not happen. Our scholars prefer to ignore the Anuradhapura finding." So, making it very clear that early history should now be dated to from the start of the 5th century BCE, he gives due credit to Dr. Rajan and claims that archaeological discoveries such as these that upset traditional beliefs should be matters of great rejoicing and not to be taken as matters of consternation and controversy as seems to be happening now. The Brahmi inscriptions, mostly in Tamil but with some Prakrit, clearly establishing the trade links that the north had with the south. In a grave in Kodumanal, a single potsherd had the name Vishaki inscribed on it. The term Nigama probably revealed a trade guild. Besides Prakrit names like Varuni and Kuviran were found, several Tamil names such as Andavan, Adan, Chamban, Madan, Ooran, Panan were also inscribed, owners affixing their names to their produce. At Keeladi, Kuviran, Adan and Thisan were some of the names, and Dr. Rajan states, the large number of graffiti marks and subsequent Tamil Brahmi scripts unearthed in Tamil Nadu and Kerala suggests that this region had a linguistic cohesiveness well before the 5th and 4th century BCE. Well, it is significant that such inscribed potsherds are found in abundance and in largest number only in the south, and the inscriptions themselves are of a secular nature. The hundreds and hundreds of inscribed potsherds discovered from various sites such as Arikamedu near Pondicherry, Kodumanal, Porundal and Alagankulam and the recent Keeladi bring two important facts to the fore. One is the widespread literacy that was prevalent in early Tamil country, while inscriptions in caves and rocks were commissioned by kings and rich noblemen. The humble potsherds were inscribed by the common man. The reasons for such early and widespread literacy in the Tamil country was because of its political independence, and in Tamil country the administrative language as well as the spoken language were one and the same, namely Tamil, whereas in many northern territories, the administrative language was either Sanskrit or Prakrit, while the people spoke a local native dialect. And this continued even during the time of the Pallavas. A Tamil Brahmi pottery inscription recovered from Andipatti in Vellore district reads, Nagan Ooral, which means Nagan's toddy pot. So, a toddy tapper, Nagan, had inscribed his name on his pot so that it wouldn't be taken away by other toddy tappers. So, a toddy tapper living in the countryside was literate enough to inscribe his own name on his pot. This clearly illustrates the state of literacy in early Tamil country. Discovery of Tamili inscribed pottery from other regions such as Egypt, Oman and as far southeast as in Thailand also attest to the fact of the trade exchange network that was vibrant at that time. In Sri Lanka, a sensational discovery was made on a potsherd excavated from a place called Tisamaharama on the southeastern coast by an excavation led by a German team where the potsherd has been dated to 200 BCE. The inscription reads Tirali Muri, which means written agreement of an assembly. The inscription bears testimony to the presence in southern Sri Lanka of a local Tamil mercantile community organized in a guild to conduct inland and maritime trade. On the basis of all the epigraphic evidence that we have seen so far, we can conclude that early history period in Tamilagam began in the 5th century BCE and that the chieftaincies that had ruled from even earlier coexisted with the monarchies during this time period. We will continue with our exploration into the polity of early Tamilagam in the following episodes. Vanakkam.